Hello and welcome. This is Dr. Ariel Policano, and you're joining me on the first week of your very own webinar, which is for knowing your health markers and knowing your labs. I'm really glad that you had the courage to join me tonight. I'm so happy to be with you to talk to you about what has previously been considered really kind of almost taboo information for the layperson. Previous to this, doctors and even some naturopathic doctors thought that this was only for the physician to know. I believe that this is really important information that you can use to empower your own health, and you can watch trends and begin to understand your evolving health either for the better or for the worse so that you can take action. I'm so excited to share this information with you over the next 3 weeks, and I hope you'll enjoy receiving and utilizing this information as much as I'm really enjoying sharing it with you. This is an interactive process, so I invite you to write things to me in the chat box and also to email me your questions in between the webinar and ask me all of your questions in our coaching session. I really want to be accessible to you during any of my webinars, and I want you to have a positive experience because throughout the year, I give numerous webinars on different topics to empower you in your own health. And I'd love you to consider me as a resource to join in over time. So with that, let's get started. This is about really understanding the labs that show up on your lab work, and this can be daunting. So let's get started in really explaining how to simplify it. Well, why in the world would you want to understand your own labs? The information in the blood really does tell an amazing story. And when we begin to understand the optimal ranges for these labs instead of the standard or conventional ranges, we really do derive quite a bit of power from that information. And I've been empowering patients and my phone consultation clients for years about this information, and now I want to make it really accessible to you. The blood can really tell you a story when you understand how to interpret the numbers that can be quite fascinating, but also you can see trends emerging over time. One of the most interesting things about lab ranges these days is twofold. Well, first of all, that it's done over the type of similar to a bell curve statistically, so that a certain amount of people will fall in the quote unquote normal range. So when we have the standard reference ranges, we can observe that 95% of people will actually fall into the reference range of quote unquote normal. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm looking around or meeting with people, I don't notice that 95% of the people have optimal wellness. So right there, it tells us there's something wrong with the regular reference ranges. In addition to this information, we want to also remember who actually goes to have labs done. Well, those are usually sick people, the people who are not well. And so we're getting an average of the sick population or the population that really is out of balance. So again, it's really important to look at this in terms of optimal information. Just so you understand the basic lab tests that we will be reviewing, I want to tell you what some of the conventional lab tests are, even though we'll be doing a bit more than this in our work together. So first of all, the complete blood count is also called a CBC. The CBC is a measure of your red blood cells and your white blood cells, and that's what we'll be going over tonight. The chemistry panel is about your blood sugar, your fasting blood sugar, your kidney function, your liver function, and also we can get information that we'll be talking about sodium and potassium that is related to your adrenal glands. And we'll be talking about other things like carbon dioxide and the anion gap that can relate to your digestion and your stomach acid. It's really interesting to look at these numbers because even mild elevations in your liver enzymes may tell a story about things that you're being exposed to. And we'd like to learn more about that so that you could do some type of an active detoxification program if need be. The other labs that are really important to learn about are like your good and bad cholesterol. Now, previous to this, what we know is that doctors kind of give you a sheet of paper that says either you have good cholesterol or you have bad cholesterol. And we'd like to look at this a little bit more deeply so we can understand more than do you need a cholesterol lowering medication or not. There's a lot more to the story about cholesterol, and I really want to share this information with you so you can understand the other important markers that we look at and also how we see really optimal cholesterol and how we break down the parts of cholesterol that may tell a better story about your proclivity or propensity towards heart disease. The lipid panel is also good for looking at your percentage of cardiac risk when we compare the LDL to HDL, so we'll talk more about that. And then the last one is the thyroid panel. This one is exceptionally exciting to really talk about because certainly TSH is not really enough information about your thyroid. That's the standard test. So when many patients come to me and they say, oh, my doctor tested for my thyroid and my thyroid was quote unquote normal. So first of all, they're just testing one test. They're not testing the whole range of tests. And also they're not looking at the optimal range for thyroid function. So there's a lot of fun stuff to be covered there. And I can't wait to get to that, which we get to actually next week. So let's get started and let's just look at what we're going to be covering tonight. Tonight's story is really about how healthy are your red blood cells and how healthy are your white blood cells. Your red blood cells specifically relate to your ability to circulate oxygen and nutrition around your body. And we're going to be concerned with the formation of the blood cells, whether they're too small or too big, because that tells a story about potential underlying nutritional deficiencies that could mostly be affecting your energy, your ability to properly oxygenate your body. Now, the other part we're looking at is the immune system, how to tell things about your white blood cells and also the different aspects of your white blood cell. And I go into a section here about how to know if your white blood cells are too low or too high, if they're in the optimal range, and then how to make a difference with your white blood cells. If you have an active infection like a flu or a virus or bacteria, we're going to go over some traditional naturopathic treatments that I think will be timely. This is the start of the cold and the flu season. We want to talk about some things that you could put into your tool chest for yourself and your family that will save you visits to the medical profession in terms of drugs and antibiotics, maybe things that you can actually do at home to resolve the problem. Now, of course, that shouldn't be used as a substitute for medical advice or seeing your doctor, but I think you'll find these home remedies very, very empowering and helpful. Now, with that, when we talk about complete blood count, red blood cells and white blood cells, we also want to look at the possibility if you're anemic, if there's information being conveyed about the status of your immune system, and if you are anemic or trending towards anemia, does that mean that you simply need iron, or does it mean that you also need some B vitamins? So when we talk about all of these different tests in the CBC, and there are about 5 markers for red blood cells, we want to say, well, what are the function of those red blood cells? Red blood cells are really amazing. They come in a concave shape that's rather flexible so that they are able to easily get in and out of certain very, very small capillaries, because at the core element or the core root of what we're talking about, it's really interesting to think about that your blood basically all gets circulated around your entire body to bring oxygen to every cell in your body. Otherwise, we would go into necrosis or gangrene if we weren't having constant circulation to all the parts of our body, which is quite a miracle. Then the blood actually has to pick up the metabolic waste and carbon dioxide all over your body in every cell and go through the entire capillary and blood system to travel all the way back to the lungs, where it dumps the carbon dioxide off and picks up new fresh oxygen. And then that blood again is recirculated throughout the entire body. I mean, if you need blood down in your toe or in your liver or in your pancreas, I mean, it has to travel all the way there through tiny, tiny, practically microscopic, not really microscopic, but very, very small capillary system. So it's quite miraculous that any of this happens at all, not to mention that it happens many times during the day and, of course, like throughout our lifetime. So the red blood cells are really at the center of all of this functioning, and they're basically carrying the oxygen. Now let's pause for a moment and think about oxygen in the body. You know that you need oxygen to take a nice deep breath, and you know that you need oxygen somehow to keep you alive. But if we go and dial this in a little bit more deeply, what you'll find is that oxygen really is the fuel that helps us to make energy. Now, of course, glucose is an important fuel too, but we can't utilize or exchange glucose into usable energy unless we have that combustion of the oxygen. The oxygen is a necessary ingredient for making efficient energy in the body. For short periods of time, we can go into what's called anaerobic metabolism, where we make small amounts of ATP, but they're a fraction of what we can make when we have oxygen. So as you're kind of going through this in your mind, I want you to see oxygen as part of the creation of life-giving energy. Now, if we can't bring the oxygen to the cells where it's needed, then we have a problem. And that's why people who have anemia can't exercise as well and also feel tired a lot of the time. Well, there are several different types of anemia, and some of them are related to iron deficiency, but some of them are also related to other nutritional deficiencies that I think you will find very helpful and quite fascinating. So red blood cells in general must be the proper size and they must be present in the proper number. So when we look at red blood cells, we consider, are they what are called microcytic, which means they're too tiny, or are they macrocytic, means they're just getting too big for their britches. They're kind of overgrowing. So red blood cells have to be the proper size and they also have to be in the proper number. We could also look at a hematocrit, which is kind of your packed blood cell volume. And if we don't see enough of the red blood cells in there, then we also become concerned. So this is kind of fun because you're going to see how doctors kind of think about these red blood cells in several different ways. Now, what I've created for you on these slides is something I think you'll find very, very interesting. There is a conventional lab range, which I've told you 95% of people fall in this range here. And then there's an optimal kind of for optimal wellness functioning lab range, which is right in a tighter range, which I think you'll really find useful because basically you guys don't need to know a ton. You could just pull out your labs and you could just see if you're falling in the optimal ranges here. If you're going lower than the optimal range, then we can talk about maybe anemia. Rarely will you actually go to the higher end, so we're not going to focus on that. But typically the trend is moving to lower numbers as people's stomach acid gets weak, or they change their diet, or they're simply just not getting enough iron or B vitamins, which is what we're going to talk about. So when we look at this red blood cell count, which is also abbreviated as the RBCs, and I will be sending you kind of a, over the next week or so, a quick reference guide so you could just take this out very easily and compare it to your labs. When you look at your labs for women, now women have less blood volume in general than men. We see 3.8 to 5.1 being the conventional range, but we see the optimal range for red blood cell count when they actually look at the blood under a microscope and count it on average being 4.0 to 4.5. Now, just to make things simpler, I didn't include all of the different units that are actually used, like nanograms per milliliter. I didn't really find that they would add anything to our conversation unless somebody on here is a scientist and really wants to know those. You can easily look them up online. So while it seems like we're just talking about no units at all, I thought it would just be easier in our conversation because you can just take these numbers and just match them to the lab, which is typically like micrograms per deciliter or per cubic microns or things like that. So if you have a question about that and you want to put it in the chat box or send me an email for further clarifications, by all means, feel free to do so. So what if your red blood cells are actually low? If your red blood cells are low, then it's possible that you are anemic. What it means is that the blood's not able to carry oxygen to the cell, so it typically makes us think about hemoglobin, something's wrong in the hemoglobin, or it could be in the actual formation of the cell itself. You're likely very tired and you're not feeling up to 100%. You probably don't exercise as well as you would like to because your blood is just not able to, for whatever reason, carry that oxygen to the cells, so the cells aren't turning out energy, ATP, as efficiently. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? We can even think about this with like Lance Armstrong and the kind of debacle that happened with him. He was packing erythropoietin into his blood, which is actually will make new red blood cells. And those new red blood cells will then carry more of that wonderful oxygen to his musculature, to the muscles. So he's able to crank out a lot more ATP than his competitor. He's able to bring more oxygen to the cells, which will produce more ATP, and then he can become a winner that way. Of course, it's not a fair advantage, but that's actually how that works, and hopefully that kind of emphasizes how important having good amount of red blood cells properly formed and the proper size can be, and any deviation from that is going to affect how you feel in terms of energy. And it's a literal connection, which is amazing. Sometimes we think the elements in our blood are so remote, and then we forget that they really affect us on a daily basis. So when thinking about an anemia, there are several different types, some of which we're not talking about because there's a deficiency anemia of chronic illness that happens in like cancer patients, and we're not going to look at that right now. We really want to look at things really from kind of the horses versus zebras, the things you probably see every single day. And so when we're clarifying, there can be an iron deficiency anemia, but there's also a B vitamin deficiency anemia. And so we really want to look at ferritin in terms of your iron stores. And it's really important. You must know what your ferritin is, especially if you're vegan, vegetarian, or if you think that you may have some digestive impairment, you're not digesting properly, because you need stomach acid in order to absorb iron. So if you know somebody, or this relates to you, that you've been on an acid blocker, or you've taken a lot of Tums, or you've had acid reflux that you've controlled with over-the-counter medications or with prescription medications, then it's something that you could definitely look at the possibility that your iron may be low. So this is the deal, is that your iron, and we could measure blood iron, we're not actually talking about it tonight, but it does come up on the CBC, and your iron could be normal. And then all of a sudden your iron is normal, and then you just crash. Or you're on a downward trend, but you don't know it because your blood keeps showing normal iron. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you love garbanzo beans. You'll have to put them on your salad. So what you do is you go to the market and you get about 100 cans of garbanzo beans. And every day you go to your cupboard, but you never look at the amount that you have left. So every day you open the cupboard, you take 1 can of beans. One day you open the cupboard and there's no cans left. And you're like, how could this be? Well, if you didn't check the amount of cans that you had in inventory, right, you wouldn't know when you were going low. It's the same thing of ferritin. We can keep the iron levels very, very high for a long time, or normal basically, and then they can be depleting, and we don't know we're in an anemia state until kind of at the very, very end. Whereas with ferritin, we can see if we're not feeding the actual supply of iron over time. So ferritin is kind of one of those underrated but really needed blood marker that I hope you will all request or order for yourself. It's not very expensive. And just to clarify that, to let you know that often when your doctor orders your labs, it goes through your insurance, which if you have good insurance, then that's wonderful. You should try to get your doctor to order these labs. That said, we'll often have $400 or $500 panels that when they're ordered, when they're billed through insurance, are billed through at that amount, but when you pay the lab cash for them, they're actually more like the true cash price of them is like $100 for a $400 or $500 panel that's billed through insurance. Because why? Because the lab is thinking we'll actually get paid, so somehow the prices get really inflated. So the reason I'm telling you this is because if you order your own labs from an online, like directlabsonline.com, what you can do is you can pay a lot less money, or if you don't have insurance, it's cheaper out of cash, and it's just faster. You don't have to argue with your doctor. Is it medically necessary? Do they want to order ferritin? Is it standard to order ferritin? You could just order it yourself. And I suggest that you order these types of labs for yourself every 6 months so that you can start to get an idea of whether this is normal. Maybe you always are low in something, or maybe this is a new and emerging trend that you could be on top of way in advance of anything actually showing signs. And wouldn't that be really cool? Because this would be the true preventive medicine for you. All right, so you must know your ferritin, and for men it's 33 to 236. For women, it's 10 to 122. Now, definitely a lot of my clients and phone consultation clients and patients in person are women, and so I've seen it down around 10, and those are often my vegetarians or my vegans, but it's not exclusive. It could be anybody who took acid blockers or maybe just was stressed out a lot of the time, so that suppressed their stomach acid, or if you're nutrient deficient in zinc or other important minerals, you can also be stomach acid deficient. And then there's an alarm rate. So less than 8 is something we have to get on right away. And we supplement iron, but I want to talk to you about what kind of iron that we supplement. So if we have low ferritin, we want to eat greens, of course, especially spinach and other leafy greens. Prunes are actually very high in iron. Black-eyed peas are high in iron. But low ferritin means an iron deficiency anemia. It actually is related to the anemia being iron deficient as opposed to the anemia being related to a B vitamin deficiency or a vitamin C deficiency, which, how cool is that? We're going to talk about that. So as far as supplementation, what they often give you at the doctor's office is they give you iron sulfate, which they'll give you 325 milligrams of one dose of iron sulfate. And guess what? You become bound up like, I don't know, but most people, it sits like a rock in their stomach and they get very constipated and they don't really get maybe they get a benefit of like a small amount of that iron in their body. So I recommend that you look on your supplement or ask me for kind of an inexpensive iron supplement, which is easy for me to get to you. It usually has about 30 milligrams of iron total, and it'll be 15 milligrams of iron glycinate and 15 milligrams of iron aspartate. So how do you know that you're B12 or folic acid deficient as opposed to being iron deficient? So let me just recap for you. There are a couple of different nutritional causes of being anemic, which means that you're not producing proper hemoglobin in order to carry the oxygen to the cells, or the red blood cell isn't being produced in the proper shape, which can be due to the B vitamin and vitamin C issue. So now if you're looking and you see that you're anemic, you have low red blood cells, you have low hematocrit. We're going to talk about these things. How do you actually know if you're the iron deficient? Well, you could check the ferritin. Okay, let's say you check the ferritin is normal. Now you want to know, oh, I have these deficiencies in B vitamins and also vitamin C, which we're going to talk about. So if there are decreased RBCs, which are red blood cells, there's some cool patterns to know if you're B12, B6, or folic acid deficient. So if the hematocrit is low, excuse me, like less than 37 in women, men have more blood volume. So that's why this is different just for these markers. If your hemoglobin is low, right? If your uric acid is low, which we're going to talk about when we talk about a chemistry panel, and this is turning out to be a very important marker. If your MCV is high or your RDW is high, and we'll talk about all of these, this is mean corpuscular volume, and this is red cell differential width. These are very, very fascinating. Don't worry, I'm going to explain them to you. But if we see this pattern, which you'll be more confident in as we go through all of this, then you may have clues that you're deficient in these B vitamins. And isn't that cool just to be able to look at your own labs and kind of know that this pattern might be emerging? It's something your medical doctor is not going to talk to you about. So this is really a leg up that you have in your own health. So this is HCT. It's one of the other markers on the red blood cells. They look at the red blood cells in different ways. So first of all, we looked at the red blood cells themselves. Are there enough red blood cells? And then we kind of look at it volume. So like kind of like if you thought about land, like how many houses per square acre. This has to do with how many red blood cells like per area in the blood. And so it's sometimes thought of like packed blood volume. And so it just gives us more information about how strong or powerful your blood is, how much the percentage of red blood cells is in there. So a hematocrit is expressed as a percentage of the red blood cells in a known volume, just like I was saying, like houses per acre, or per capita, people per area of land. So the conventional range is 38 to 50 for men, 34 to 4% for women. And so there's just kind of a little bit of a tightening of the range here. We like to see it up as high as 37% for women in the optimal range, but kind of in the same range in terms of not getting too high. Remember, with these numbers, we tend to see them more low than high. And as far as I think what most of us are going to be looking at in terms of wellness, we're going to be worried about these numbers being more low than high. And especially if these numbers are trending towards the low side, like it's kind of just on the low end or a low normal, then this is a brilliant time for you to order the ferritin and look at the ferritin or request the ferritin be done. So I hope that's making sense to you. If it's not, you can chat to me in the chat box, or you can send me an email if you're listening to this on the recording. So basically it tells us how much blood is packed with the red blood cells like per volume, which we kind of already talked about. So far we've talked about the red blood cells, the number of red blood cells, the kind of percentage of red blood cells in an area, and we're gathering a complete picture about how well and healthy your red blood cells are in your body. Now we want to go to HGB, which is hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is that beautiful substance that has the capacity to carry the oxygen in the body. And remember, we need iron to be able to produce that wonderful hemoglobin. Okay, so when we look at this, we see that the conventional range for hemoglobin is, let's just take women, 11.5 to 15, so a wide range. And then this is really cool, you guys. We look at the optimal range, 13.5 to 14.5. Now, this was done through a lot of different research, the optimal ranges, based on really understanding the physiology of the blood and what is actually needed for optimal function. So this is something that came out of functional medicine. This is actually, some research that was done by colleagues over time, and they saw that these were actually the ranges that physiology functioned better within. So hemoglobin is the oxygen-carrying molecule in your red blood cells, and it tells us the capacity to get oxygen to your cells. So good, healthy hemoglobin means, wow, when I breathe and I go running and I go biking, I have lots and lots of oxygen in order to fuel the fire, to turn my glucose into gasoline, well, not turning it into gasoline, it's like turning the gasoline into power, turning your glucose into pure energy, which is called ATP. So low hemoglobin associated with anemia and associated with fatigue, feeling cold, just not having enough chi, being more deficient. If those things sound familiar to you, could be happening to you. So if hematocrit, hemoglobin, and red blood, the RBCs are low, that means that there's some type of underlying nutritional deficiency. So it could be iron, it could be B12, it could be vitamin B6, it could be folic acid, and I use folic acid and folate kind of interchangeably, and it could also be vitamin C. So low iron if the ferritin is low B6, B12, and folic acid, and vitamin C deficiency. So when we think of vitamin C, we think of either supplementing ascorbic acid, which is not the most ideal way to do it, but certainly acceptable. Camu is a good source of vitamin C, as is broccoli, as is the different peppers. Of course, there are many, many foods that are good, nice and high in vitamin C. So in summary, oops, this is a repeat. Let's just go through this. We'll kind of summarize that. But let's make it relevant for you. If you suspect that you're anemic, which is quite common, you want to take the proper nutrition and help to build your blood. So building your blood is something they really talk about in Chinese medicine too. We want to build the qi. And definitely signs of anemia are kind of the same signs as qi deficiency. There's definitely a match there. So let's look at some of the ways that this can happen. When we want to build the blood, we can have greens, kale, chard, collard greens. Those will help to build your blood. They'll help to build the iron. And the chlorophyll will also additionally help to kind of oxygenate your blood so you get more energy. Greens powders such as wheatgrass, barley grass, and spirulina are good for building the blood. I also want to let you know that in Chinese medicine, I don't necessarily subscribe to this, but for some people it does work. They find that eggs, like pure farm fresh eggs or eggs you get from your own chicken, and also free range chicken itself, help to build the qi. That's kind of a principle of Chinese medicine. So to build the blood, to build the qi, the energy that flows from those foods when they're digested properly could actually be beneficial. And also in a book called Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon, again, this isn't something I do myself, but some people swear by this. In order to overcome their anemia or their deficiency, they actually use bone broth. And that's something you could look up online under just Sally Fallon bone broth. And it's basically taking the raw bone with the marrow in it and making sort of a soup or stew from it. Some people really enjoy that and find it beneficial to building their blood and building that iron-rich blood, because after all, they're important elements of the immune system and the ability to build blood that comes from the bone marrow. So we get that energetics when we have the bone broth. Again, not something that I do, but I have some people who are really love the Nourishing Traditions concept by Sally Fallon, who find that to be very helpful for them during the winter time, especially in a rainy or cold climates like where I am in Portland, Oregon. So vitamin C support like Camu Camu can also help, because we want to bring this all together. So that helps with the smaller or less of the red blood cells, or it helps to form them more properly. So remember, the iron helps with the hemoglobin, and the vitamin C and B vitamins help with the formation of the blood cell itself. You need both of those. If you do want to supplement with actual like vitamin kind of substances instead of food as medicine, which I find that both are often necessary depending on how deficient that person is, I don't like to fool around with stuff like this, because B12 definitely could be a huge factor in your health, leading to permanent paresthesias and other damage if it's not treated properly, but also because your quality of life can really improve once you get the proper amount of B vitamins in your body. And when you don't have the proper amount of B vitamins, not only does it cause the blood deficiency, but also causes more mood swings, poor hormonal regulation, um, and poor production of energy. So a lot of different things that really could be improved. And in this case, doing some what I call synthetic supplementation could actually really change the quality of a person's life. So I feel like it's called for. So B12 as much as 5,000 micrograms per day. The typical RDA is more like 100 micrograms, so this is a huge step up from there. And I find that this amount ends up being a therapeutic dose that really does help people. I recommend a type of B vitamin called methylcobalamin, which I can help you to get, or hydroxycobalamin, but not necessarily cyanocobalamin, although it's not the worst thing in the world on a short-term basis. And sometimes I can only find high doses that are cyano, but let me help you, because I know I can find the 5,000 range in the methyl. And the way that works is that I basically order the supplement, I have it sent to you. You'll find that's as competitive a price usually that's as in your health food store, but much higher quality. And usually if I can get something like over $75, I can offer you free shipping. So talk to me if there's something that you need. So vitamin B6, these are some of the things that you can find vitamin B6 in. You'd be talking about supplementing about 5 milligrams of vitamin B6, and folic acid about 100 to 200 micrograms. But if you have any sort of even a trace of a plant-based diet where you have some beans and vegetables every once in a while, you're probably getting enough folic acid. I know I feel I am getting enough folic acid. It's actually not in my B vitamin complex, because it is possible to over supplement folic acid. We are going to talk about a genetic deficiency in the next webinar, or the last one, which has a funny name. It's called like the MTFHR deficiency in folic acid, and it makes it hard for some people to actually absorb folic acid properly, so they need it in a supplemental form that's already broken down. And this is particularly significant for moms who want to get pregnant. I mean, for women who want to get pregnant and become moms. So there's some more markers for us to talk about. And so just to recap again, we've talked about the number of red blood cells, the kind of percentage of blood that's available in a certain area that they test from, and then, which is like an average, and then the hemoglobin, which is the oxygen carrying ability in your blood. So let's talk about a few more markers like MCV, which is mean corpuscular volume. This is actually the size of the red blood cells. They can either be too low or too high. too low is more in line with the red blood cell anemia, but too high is dangerous too, and I want to share with you some information about that. But the mean corpuscular volume is actually like the mean is the average, and corpuscular has to do with the body, like the body of the red blood cell, and volume is how big is it, and basically like how big in diameter it is. And so this is really cool, you guys. Like one of my favorite parts of looking at labs, just in thinking about it, if B12, B6, and folic acid are not present, it causes the blood cell to overgrow. And so the blood volume, or the blood cell itself, actually gets bigger. And we have certain prefixes for when something's too small, we use the prefix micro, just as in any other part of our language. But when something's too big in this, talking about the blood, we use the word macro. And that makes sense, right? So we have macrocytic anemias, meaning when the blood cell is actually too big. And so I often see this problem with MCV from the optimal perspective. And we're going to see that. It's one of my favorite markers to talk about. So let's get right to it. So mean corpuscular volume, we kind of talked about this already, but the number in conventional medicine is between 80 and 98. But the optimal range is really down below 80, around 85 or lower. And I often see this number creeping up, 85, 88, 90, kind of over time. And I want to tell you why. But the alarm range, which I've added in here, which would be if it was below 78, which would be like a microcytic anemia. Or if we see it over 95, that means we're heading towards the macrocytic anemia. In either case, on either side of this, you can expect fatigue, because if the blood cell is too small, it's not going to carry the oxygen properly. And if it's too large, it's not going to carry the oxygen properly. It's not going to do what it's supposed to do. And of course, the blood carries also nutrition with it as well. It's the main vehicle for transferring nutrition. So we want it to be the right size, as well as have the proper amount of iron and the proper amount of hemoglobin. So basically, when we're looking at this, we see that a low value is usually iron deficiency anemia, and a high value is, interestingly enough, it's a B12 deficiency most likely, although we usually supplement also the B6 and folic acid. So if it's a high value, it also is indicative of a possible pancreatic enzyme deficiency. So I usually give both. I give B6, B12, folic acid, and pancreatic enzymes. And then we start to see that MCV start to come down. People start to feel a lot better. So a high value from an optimal perspective is really over 85. But definitely, you guys, if it's over 90, you want to take action on it. So if it's over 90, you really want to get some like digestive pancreatic enzymes and also get some really good B-complex vitamins. And I can help you in ordering the right form of all of those. It really doesn't cost that much more, but the quality that you get is so much better. What you basically have access to in the health food store is not very good quality. Would be like buying anything else, like your like shampoo, even though you think it's going to work really well. It's got kind of the middleman thing going on there, and so you've got usually kind of the lowest common denominator, even of some of what potentially could be high quality supplements. So I don't recommend you buy your supplements at the health food store. Let me be a resource to you, my staff, myself, be a resource to you in getting to you very high quality naturopathic supplements at pretty much comparable prices. Your white blood cells are what we're talking about next. We talked all about the red blood cells and how they relate to anemia and your energy, and how you can know if they're too small or too big and what to do about them. Now we want to talk about your white blood cells. Your white blood cells, as you know, are related to your immune system. And they can tell a cool story if they're too low or they're too high, and you can watch the trends over time. Like, you can know if something is going on in your body way before then you might get symptoms. So I think that's really good, because just like you'd always have an engine check or an engine diagnostic, it's like, shouldn't there be something for your body where you could tell, you don't have to wait to get it, you can tell things in advance. And often, doctors just don't have access to this kind of optimal information. So again, I'm so really impressed that you had the courage to see if this is something that you were capable, of grasping, which I know you will be able to grasp this. So white blood cells represent an important part of your immune system. There are several types, like neutrophils or basophils or eosinophils or lymphocytes, which we're going to talk about. And labs look at your total white blood cells, whether they're low or they're high. And they also look at your white blood cells in relation to each other. So they look at percentages and they compare the percentages to each other. So that could be kind of fun to look at as well. So we'll get to look at all of that. So how cool is that? Okay, so when we look at white blood cells, we want to know if they're too high or too low. So if they're too high, is your immune system being stressed in some way? Do you have an active underlying infection? So you kind of know about white blood cells. If you started to have chronically high white blood cells, like you could see it if you did it a couple of times, like every 6 months, and maybe you see them start to elevate and you think to yourself, wow, maybe I have a subclinical infection going on. So I now want to take steps to get herbs or engage in wellness practices that could balance my white blood cell and my immune system. So you can start to see as you're tracking this, as you're knowing the numbers, you can take real action. These are things I've been able to do for my own health because this is something that I've studied, but why shouldn't you be able to do it for your health? So if your white blood cells are too low, this can happen when you're under long-term stress. You're experiencing long-term stress, or even if you were taking like corticosteroids like prednisone, because high levels of cortisol, either your own body making high cortisol or prednisone, which is made to suppress your immune system, can actually cause the reduction in white blood cells. Now, wouldn't you like to know and get that feedback? Boy, I better start doing some stress reduction techniques and really take care of this. So again, you're looking at the trends. If they start to decrease over time, at least you know in advance. So now, have you been under long-term stress? Should we do something to improve your immune system, which we're going to talk about? And are you getting enough rest and the right nutrition? Because getting enough rest and getting enough vitamin C, as you know, and good healthy foods without too much sugar, because we know that sugar suppresses your white blood cell production for up to 6 hours. Isn't that interesting? Let me say that again. Eating refined sugar suppresses your immune system for up to 6 hours. Now, that's why it's so important if you feel like you get the chill or you feel like you have something coming on, for heaven's sake, refrain from all sweet foods and even grains and breads and anything else. I mean, don't have a donut. That's going to be the sure clincher to your body that you're going to get sick. If you'd like to get sick, then you should consume some of those things. And we're also going to talk about getting alkalized, versus some of those foods also create an acidosis in your body, and so that also contributes to the issue. So now your total white blood cells are, let's see, your total white blood cells in conventional medicine, this is actually really, really interesting. 3.7 up to 11 is considered the conventional range of quote unquote normal. And I love this optimal range because it's much, much tighter. It's 5.0 to 7.5. And so this is a nice range to work from. If you notice that it's too low or too high out of the range here, then you have something that you can really do about it. And so the alarm range would be, gosh, if it was below 3, that would be very, very frightening because you wouldn't really have anything to protect you. Just going back to the root of what all this is, your white blood cells are literally all over your body and they're looking for foreign invaders. They're looking for they're trying to read whether something is a protein in terms of being a bacteria or a virus, and then they actually try to attack it. They try to engulf it, they try to eat it and digest it and get rid of the harmful byproducts of breaking it down. So they're trying to dismantle constantly invaders and things in your body that could be causing deeper levels of harm. So this is so interesting. So when your white blood cells become suppressed due to stress, you really lose that ability and you become really compromised in your defenses. If you notice that your white blood cells are below the optimal range of 5, then here are some actions that you can take in order to help your white blood cells to become healthier. You can use hot and cold constitutional hydrotherapy, which is a handout I'm going to send to you. I'm going to explain to you how you could do a hot and cold towel treatment to any member of your family, or teach that member of your family to do it for you. And by the way, if you're a healer, a massage therapist, or you could do this in your practice. This really is very, very benign. It's just the application of hot and cold towels in a certain sequence and of a certain time, always keeping your client warm, or doing this to your family member and always keeping them warm with blankets as they're going through the hot and cold phases. that is one of the most powerful things you can do in natural medicine. It's one of the most understated aspect of natural medicine because you can't patent it, can't really sell it, can't really put it in bottles, can't really package it, et cetera, basically. But the founding forefathers and foremothers of naturopathic medicine sometimes gave people 50 or 100 treatments back in the 40s and 50s, and it changed lives. Where they would come in for like hydrotherapy sessions that would basically cure their cancer or definitely cure their flu. I mean, it really would be better if we could all go for hydrotherapy when we had a cold, a flu. It really would, the need for antibiotics and, cold suppressants and things like that basically shut down our own body's natural response would be amazing. And by the way, usually any type of a cold or flu, yes, it's true that germs are involved. When you have a lot of mucus coming out of your nose and other orifices, do you know that when you do have a mucus situation, it's typically looked at in true naturopathic medicine as being more like congestion in your colon. That's so bad that now it has to come out somewhere. So it's actually coming out like in another way. It's expressing that excess in another way. So, if you think about the traditional naturopaths of yesteryear, the last century, really what they used to do in their office, they used to give enemas in their office and, high colonics in their office because they understood that this congestion in the colon was leading to these other problems that were causing cold and flu and illnesses. So you don't have to do that, but at least learning to do the hot and cold hydrotherapy treatment for you and your family will be very, very powerful. Also, of course, vitamin C, which I always recommend, not necessarily in the form of ascorbic acid, though I'm not opposed to it. I mean, when I'm very sick and I want to get better faster, I'm not opposed to taking 1 to 10 grams of vitamin C in the form of ascorbic acid, but as also having the ability when you're well to take it from natural sources like broccoli and cayenne pepper and camu camu and rose hips. Now we do know that those forms of vitamin C come in a much more bioavailable form. Also, padiarco, licorice, just reducing stress in your life, avoiding sugar, and really getting sufficient amounts of rest. One of the worst things you can do for your immune system is really stay up to midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. It's very disruptive of your body's cortisol rhythm. And so it's much better to go to bed as long as you can before midnight. 9:30 there's kind of a common agreement in Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, that's a really good time to go to sleep at night. So these are basic things your grandmother could be telling you, but really good natural medicine boils down to some common sense ability or just somehow setting yourself up logistically to take good care of the basics of good health, which is like, proper oxygenation, proper nutrition, proper food and digestion, and proper sleep, and of course, exercise. So, when all of those things can come together, that's a great thing, and you will reap the benefits for yourself because you'll start to feel better. So we're up to the types of white blood cells because labs and doctors don't just look at whether you have low white blood cells or high white blood cells. They like to see the differential. It's called a differential, and it looks like at the percentage of different types of white blood cells that are in your body. Because interestingly enough, different white blood cells are specific to different types of invaders. Like your neutrophils are basically geared towards your bacterial infection. So any type of bacteria that might cause like a bacterial pneumonia, your neutrophils are kind of on the forefront. They're the main ones that are kind of scooping those germs up, basically engulfing them and digesting them and helping to eliminate them from the body. So these white blood cells are for fighting bacteria. They're usually high in comparison and higher percentage to other white blood cells that are for viruses or allergies or parasites, which we'll see. And then immature neutrophils are actually called bands. And so these little tiny bands are often tested when you do have possible serious bacterial infection that drove you to the doctor, because they're looking for that the body's producing a lot of new bands or neutrophils in response to that bacterial infection. So it's something that often in the hospital they order stat, to find out about the bands. So the conventional range is really interesting of the neutrophils, 35 to 40%, 35 to 74%, but the optimal is actually 40 to 60. So again, a much tighter range on the optimal right here for the neutrophils, for the bacterial. So that's kind of a fascinating difference. So we found that this physiologically is the better range. All right, so how do you deal with an acute bacterial infection? Let's talk about that. So if you find out your neutrophils are high, okay, you have a bacterial infection, this hot and cold, when I say constitutional, that's that hot and cold towel treatment that I'm going to send to you. Echinacea and Oregon grapefruit, we often used to see echinacea and golden seal coupled together, but echinacea and Oregon grapefruit, which is now more readily available and less expensive, is also called berberis. So when those two are coupled together, it's really, really good ally for herbal support for helping to really buffer up, really increase the ability of your white blood cells. I don't know the mechanism of action of how it works. We've just seen observationally that it does help you to increase and boost your immune system like your white blood cells. Also, alkalizing the body. Now, if you look in the texts of the traditional naturopaths of the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, what they really talk about is alkalizing the body. And it's really quite amazing. They're really much more likely to bring somebody a potassium broth than to bring them an antibiotic. The whole idea was that if you could bring the body into an alkaline state, that the terrain itself would change, the actual kind of a petri dish that the germ is growing in would become one that is so unhostable, unpalatable to the host that actually can't thrive there. So when your body's filled with donuts, and we can't say Twinkies anymore since Twinkies are going out of business, but when your body's filled with junk food, it's a great way to start to grow or create an acid environment, which germs love to grow in. It's kind of like the self-composting mechanism or something that changes in your body in order to break down all of that junk. And so when we start to alkalize the body, that is, fill it with minerals like calcium, magnesium, potassium, those minerals help to neutralize the pH, just like an Alka-Seltzer would neutralize acid in your stomach. And that alkalizing effect switches the pH to one that the bacteria and the viruses just don't thrive in. So all of that very kind of going all around the block here to really say this directly is basically, if you have things like celery and carrots and a little bit of potato peeling, you brew that for yourself for about an hour, and it wouldn't be any harm to add some shiitake mushrooms to that to kind of improve your immune system. Would be great for fighting off a bacterial infection, as is drinking alkaline water if you have a water alkalizer, and definitely avoiding sugar. Sugar will suppress your immune system for up to 6 hours, specifically the white blood cells. So far we've talked about low and high white blood cells, we've talked about neutrophils, and now we want to talk about lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are most often associated with viruses. They're manufactured by the bone marrow, and I'm sorry about this. This is something that's a repeat. Don't just ignore this on the slide for now. This is what we want to look at. They actually are manufactured by the bone marrow, and they destroy and get rid of toxic byproducts of protein metabolism, which is kind of interesting because some of the leaders or the gurus in the raw food movement would say, of course, eating meats are a very complex protein, and they felt that disease such as cancer was actually caused by this incredible strain on the immune system created by all these proteins. And this is kind of interesting since these lymphocytes actually get rid of the toxic byproducts of protein metabolism. And so if you think about it, when you're eating all of that protein, you could possibly be overworking your immune system over a long period of time. Now, we don't know if that's actually true, if that relationship actually exists, but it kind of makes sense, When you really stress your body out with that high protein, it does seem like it's very hard to break down, and it probably does strain some parts of the body, and who knows, it probably could, it could be the lymphocytes. Now, when we see lymphocytes high and we think of viruses, we think of things like the flu or a cold, of course, being a form of a virus. And the reason we haven't found the cure for the common cold is because if we're looking to treat the virus specifically, like the influenza virus, we know that viruses are very sneaky and they tend to replicate themselves they tend to mutate very often. So there are many different forms of viruses, and so it's hard to develop a vaccine for just one virus because it's constantly changing. Kind of interesting. But on the other hand, we can always prop up the immune system, which could fight anything, no matter what form of the virus is. So that's really where we want to look, is we want to look into nature and switching on the nature in the body, because it's our nature to be healthy. So these lymphocytes in the conventional range, 14 to 46% of the blood is of the white blood cells or lymphocytes, and in the optimal range, actually a little bit higher of the amount of natural lymphocytes in the body. And then here's the alarm range, so you can just kind of compare your blood work to this. It's gonna be really super fun, right? So when you're dealing with viral infections, you wouldn't take an antibiotic because those are for bacterial. They're not for viruses, and when you take them, you actually do shut down your body's response. You actually create suppression. So in that moment when you take the antibiotics, you feel better because now you've turned off your body's kind of normal mechanism of fighting off the virus. Just like when you take an aspirin, you feel better, but what you did is you suppressed the fever that actually was fighting the infection for you in the first place. It was burning it up, as well as probably any other subclinical infections. You know, a fever is a good thing. That's why going in a sauna and experience hyperthermia is also a good thing. So saunas should be in your wheelhouse for wellness regimens. You want to make sure, especially in the cold weather, that you're getting your temperature up real high, which is great for students of things like Bikram yoga because they're able to get their core temperature up high and experience hyperthermia while they're doing the exercise. So should you get the flu shot? I wouldn't recommend it. There are a lot of other ways to promote your immune system and not have to put all that stuff like I don't know what's in the flu shot these days, but I wouldn't want to put it into my body. So you make your decision, but you really could do a lot of other things to prevent yourself from getting the flu, like washing your hands and doing all these things for your immune system. But if you do get the flu, then using any of these natural therapies or all of them in concert together will definitely shorten the duration of your flu. In fact, it might not even become a full-fledged flu. I say that because on numerous occasions I took this homeopathic flu remedy, which is called acylococcinum. I know it has a crazy name, it's on your screen, but you can find it in most of the health food stores, and it's actually homeopathic flu. It's really weird. It comes from, I think, duck liver, which makes it sound like it's for like pate or something, but basically it works. I've taken acylococcinum when I felt like that kind of just the onset of the flu, and I've taken it like every half hour like it was going out of style, and I almost never got the full-blown flu as a result. It's kind of a miracle. And then eupatorium is another one to use at the onset of the flu, and it's called bone break because when you feel that achy, breaky flu sensation coming on, you feel like your bones are going to break. Everything's aching, and so that's the Latin name for that is eupatorium, but the Western translation or name for it is bone break. So it's really great to take acylococcinum and eupatorium at the beginning of any flu, if you can pronounce them or remember them. And then echinacea, of course. And I'm going to send you a handout for something called warming socks treatment. Warming socks treatment is appropriate when people feel the onset of a flu or pneumonia. So I will send you the warming socks treatment handout, and it teaches you how to use a cold sock and warm sock together in a way that will move the blood away from your head and areas of congestion and will help to just basically powerfully move the blood in the body. And that when you move blood in the body, you actually move stagnation and you get oxygen to new places, and it can make a tremendous difference. So then drinking alkaline water or drinking the potassium broth and alkalize in the body also is, of course, a way to help with any type of bacterial or viral infection or some type of a challenge to the immune system. Then the last type of white blood cell we want to talk about is called an eosinophil. Then we're going to talk about platelets, and then we'll sum up and I'll tell you what we're going to be talking about for next week. Eosinophils are in a high percentage when you have either a parasite or an allergy, which is kind of interesting. And I have seen them elevated both in myself and other people, leading to the question, is it an allergy or is it a parasite? So there's some ways that you can start to distinguish. But what eosinophils do is they ingest what are called antigen-antibody complexes, and pretty much an easy way of thinking about this is that your body is, the antibody is the part from your body which protects you, and it kind of gloms on, latches on, and deactivates germs, which are the antigen. And so as a result, the eosinophils kind of clean all of that junk up, and ingest it and then eliminate all of the toxic byproducts. But they also are responsive to parasitic infection. So it's easy to get parasites like worms and other things that basically we say parasites because what they do is they feed off of your nutrition and they excrete waste in your body. And they're actually different from bacteria and viruses in terms of, the form that they take, worms and um, other sorts of what are strictly defined. They're usually bigger than bacteria or viruses typically, but can be microscopic. So anyway, so the percentage is 0 to 7 for the eosinophils, and the range is less than 3 optimally, which is interesting. A little difference here. So you want to see your eosinophils percentage less than here. If it's more, then we suspect parasites or allergies. So do you think you have parasites? Parasites can cause bloating, um, problems with digestion, chronic fatigue, muscle aches, a whole host of things can be attributed to parasites. In fact, Hulda Clark wrote a book called The Cure for All Cancers, and she really said that all cancers were related to this one liver fluke, which is like a liver parasite that lives in your liver and gallbladder. And um, a lot of people in the health field feel that she was actually correct. So they recommend actually that you do this protocol every year with black walnut, clove, and wormwood, which would help to activate that the liver fluke. And so that would be something that you could do. But let's just go over this here. If you think you have parasites, and sometimes people just know, consider having a stool sample done by a naturopathic doctor. They send it out to the lab, or you send it directly to the lab. It looks at if there's possibly eggs. I know this gives some people the willies or more. It's good to have it done. If you've never had it done, you suspect you do have parasites because most medical doctors will just dismiss this out of hand that you don't. Or you can also try high-dose pancreatic proteolytic enzymes, because the proteolytic enzymes, and I can help you to find the right proteolytic enzymes, will actually literally eat up the parasite, which is kind of an interesting concept because it's made out of protein, and it eats up and helps to basically break down the parasites in your body. The black walnut, clove, and wormwood will actually kill the parasite, and then you have like kind of a die-off experience, and then your body's able to eliminate the actual waste product of the parasite itself through its own metabolic enzymes. And then you can do your own deworming protocol of the black walnut, clove, and wormwood once per year. And again, I can help you to get that type of a protocol going for yourself. And then also taking gentian for stomach acid. The reason I mention this is because the reason we get parasites in the first place is because our stomach acid is very weak. Our stomach acid is usually for breaking down proteins, but also is that acid supposed to protect us from any potential invaders, anything that's alive that could come in through the food supply. But most people's stomach acid is like in the tank, it's just really, 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 really low. And so they not only don't break down or digest their proteins properly, but they also don't have the needed protection from parasites. So gentian is a bitter herb that you can just swallow. You don't have to taste it, although if you do, you actually get more activity of the stomach acid by tasting it. But it is a bitter, and sometimes people don't want to swallow that bitter pill, so to speak. They don't want to taste bitters because we're not used to experiencing bitters, and we tend to have a very negative reaction to the taste of bitter because we're not used to it. And yet it's the one thing that we really, really need. When we take bitters in through the mouth, it creates a sweetness of health in the body. When we take bitters in through our mouth, it creates a sweetness of health in our body. And so it's important to remember that. So the last section of the evening for tonight talks about blood platelet count. And the blood, as you may know, platelets are related to clotting in the body. And you may know like hemophiliacs don't have the ability to clot, so you cannot kind of relate it to, you would bleed to death if you didn't have your platelets, which help you when you have an injury. So the conventional range here is actually similar to the optimal range, but I do want to talk to you about some interesting things about the blood platelet count. If you have high platelets, this is really interesting because you have more stuff clotting, you have an increased risk of atherosclerosis, of blockages because of these clots, right? And also an event happening, like a heart attack happening because of the high platelet count. So you definitely want to know if you have high platelet counts. And something interesting related to that is that if you're under stress for a long period of time, or you're always feeling stressed out, that actually tends to create more clotting factors. So now you start to see that relationship of the person who really overworks and doesn't get enough exercise and is stressed out all the time. They're actually, the potential for them to have some type of a cardiovascular event is much greater because they're building up all of those clotting factors in the body. Also, if you take oral contraceptives, if you people have cancer, although it's much higher, acute infections, and something usually stems from a genetic problem with the blood, can have too many platelets, and that's called polycythemia. For different reasons. But basically with this, it's just good to know that this high platelets could come from maybe something like this. You want to know what your blood platelet level is. You want to know if it's too high. And also something interesting, if your platelets are too low, if they're below that 155 number, it's kind of interesting. It could be a latent infection that you don't know about. It could be heavy metal exposure, which is also related to this, oxidative stress or free radicals. So this is really interesting if you're being exposed to something in your environment that you don't know about. This could be affecting you. Low blood cells can lead to symptoms of purpura and petechiae. I know, say that 10 times fast, but what this means is easy bruising. Have you ever had that where you wake up in the morning, or you later on you have a bruise, you remember how you got it? So that's related to the purpura and petechiae. Low platelets can also be a sign of anemia, and they can be a sign of a B12 deficiency, folic acid deficiency, or a selenium deficiency. Now, there are some panels that are specific for nutritional deficiencies that I can also talk to you about. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're really specific. They actually look at they look, interestingly enough, you guys, at the lymphocytes, and they're able to measure different things like B vitamin status, selenium, zinc, and other minerals very, very specifically through the white blood cells. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's a very interesting nutritional panel that I would say if you had it once every 3 years, it would be highly helpful in informing you about nutritional deficiencies that there's no way you would know otherwise, because even these basic blood panels don't tell us that depth of information. So tonight we talked about red blood cells, which when they're either too small or too big, they can lead to incredible fatigue and a problem with really circulating the nutrition and oxygen in our body, which is called anemia. Then there are white blood cells. We can tell a lot by our white blood cells whether our immune system is properly able to defend us from things that we're being presented in our environment. And when we're losing that battle, whether we have a bacterial or viral infection, now you know some important things that can help to boost those red blood cells, whether it be herbal or hydrotherapy or just different lifestyle modifications. And then the last thing is platelets. So we do want to know about how we're clotting and whether our platelets are too low or too high in terms of our overall health. The great thing about starting to look at this and either keeping a complete copy of your labs from your doctor or ordering your own labs is that if you look at this every 6 months for the next 3 years, you're going to see trends. So if you see something in your white blood cells starting to dip, or your red blood cells that doesn't look right, or you see a trend of increasing or decreasing, you really do have the power now to start to take action to really correct perhaps underlying nutritional deficiencies or imbalances. Nothing in the body happens in a vacuum. There really are no mysteries in the body. There may be just things that we're not properly informed about, or we perhaps haven't discovered. But most illness is really related, most imbalances are related to an environmental exposure, nutritional deficiency, stress, like emotional stress. And that pretty much sums it up. I mean, we really can usually get in there at some imbalance, deficiency, or dis-ease just by knocking off a few of those and correcting them. So it's quite amazing. So really, the cure for all whatever, the race for the whatever, race for the cure, well, we know all of those things. And I think you'll start to discover that even more as we go forward, how much you can be empowered in your own health. And that's what this is all about. That's what I'm usually trying to convey in any of my seminars, webinars, etc. So anyway, for next week, we really want to look at the thyroid markers. I want you to really grasp how inadequate the current testing methods are, and I want you to have your thyroid properly assessed so we can really find out how we can maximize your thyroid function. Most of the women that I work with, their thyroid is not working properly, and it's affecting their quality of life on a very deep level. We're also going to look at cholesterol inflammatory markers. We're going to break down the cholesterol to really find out what's called the fractionated cholesterol. And if you know someone who has high cholesterol, how you can really make sense out of these numbers. We'll also look at other markers of inflammation like C-reactive protein and homocysteine. It allows us to put a more complete cardiovascular picture together. And then the last thing we'll look at is information about your blood sugar. What is optimal blood sugar? And when this gets a little bit out of range, to look at some of the insulin tests. Some of these combined are called the glucose insulin tolerance test. And this can actually be a very powerful test. People don't know that even though their blood sugar may be normal, their ability to regulate their blood sugar over time may be quite damaged. So that's about it for tonight. And I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you next week at the same time. This is Dr. Ariel Policano wishing you the very best of health. Contact me through the email that you have from registration if you have any questions, and let's schedule your coaching session. Have a wonderful night and take care.